but we're in this part of my life. So, but it's helpful to know. Why is that? I want to talk to you about what I assume. I'm making a lot of assumptions about you all now. What I assume your dream is, if you're here. Or maybe you meet an Amazonian river dolphin. Have some kind of a language model running.
I like the color of your shirt.
And you get this as the output. And that's kind of maybe what people are on some implicit level hoping for from talking with the animals. But are there other ways to think about communication? And so I found this nice quote as I've been reading up on animal psychology. Animal signals often have been studied as potentially containing meaning with referential specificity. An alternative approach is to examine patterns of responses to closely measured non-referential acoustic features of signals. Many signals can affect perceivers in beneficial ways that do not require the activation of mental representations which are analogous to words. Okay. So for example, you saw me doing some coordinated music sound making with some other hominids. And here's a vocal duet. These are Bolivian titi monkeys. And mated pairs often do this, and their kids learn to do this too with them. So it's kind of like a family, you know, some of those like the Jacksons or some other family band. The Von Trapps, for those of you who like musicals. These are sort of like Bolivian Von Trapp family. And if you start looking into it, there appear to be three main patterns of interaction that people have been observing amongst the non-humans. Duets, like the titi monkeys we just saw. We also find this in gibbons, sperm whales, and many others. These are just, you know, examples, not all-inclusive lists. Choruses of macaques, if you've ever heard them, bottlenose dolphin, humpback whales, chimpanzees. I've got a friend who works at I'm from Chicago. I'm from Northwestern University, and I've got a friend who works at the Lincoln Park Zoo there with the primates, and the chimpanzees in particular really enjoy drumming and chorusing together. So it's not even just vocals, it's turn taking, antiphony, the thing that we generally think of as polite when we have conversations, unless we're really excited and getting into what the other person is saying. And then it kind of turns into a chorus. Animals are doing duets, they're doing choruses, they're doing antiphony. Animals have rhythm. You don't believe me? Let's see what the people at the University of Santa Cruz have to say.
So we trained Rona to move her head in time to rhythmic sounds. And outside of humans, this ability had been seen previously only in parrots and some related birds. So Rona is actually the first non-human mammal to be shown to be able to keep a beat.
It seems pretty cool. It seems like perhaps our
When we first trained Ronan, we used a simple repeating sound, something like a metronome. But once she had learned, without further training, Ronan was able to find and keep the beat in complex stimuli, including music.
Okay. The thing I wanted you to notice there was this seal is motivated not by a love of that music, which I do love. The seal was motivated by getting a treat afterwards. And so that's a thing to remember, and that I'll come back to. Okay, so we know that they can follow our beat if they want to, many species, if they're motivated to. And there are many species where they have found rhythmic vocalizations. Every species you see on here, by the way, this is a titi monkey again, our seal friends, elephants, bats, songbirds, various non-human primates. And I didn't put sperm whales on here, but it's clear if you listen to a sperm whale, yes, them too. There have been those studying the temporal structure in both human and non-human sound production. And this is actually somebody was, this is from, when is this, 2017. So the deep learning thing hadn't spread everywhere. This is, they actually did this with support vector machine kernels. Anyway, what they ended up doing with this, and this is kind of a dimensional reduction that you see here. This light colored, this bluish kind of aqua, that's basically pop music. This is basically classical music. This is non-human species. And for some reason, they were measuring TED Talks. And what they found is there are hierarchical rhythmic structures in all these things, but the hierarchical rhythmic structures within humans vary amongst their activities, their pop music, their classical music, their speeches, and non-human species. They found rhythmic structure. This is a discovery thing with their deep learning and their support vector machines and whatnot. So one could make arguments about. And of course, we're doing dimensionality reduction. So one could make lots of arguments about whether this data visualization is perfect, but there is a bit of overlap, and that gives me some hope. There was a question.
So what does rhythmic structure mean in this context? Or like what's maybe the most marginal example of a sound that is on the edge between having rhythmic structure?
That's one thing that would be any repeating pattern at either a fine grain or at a higher grain, like here we go. And so we have two levels of repeating rhythmic structure, like A versus B, and then within A or B, it's going. So they found amongst us, amongst our various activities, amongst the not us and their various activities, that there are, not surprisingly, hierarchical rhythmic structures that are there. And do I even need to mention melody? How many people have ever heard a songbird? How many people here have not heard whale singing somewhere? Probably, and there's like, oh, I'm having trouble sleeping. And you get told, just put on the whale song. That they actually do that. There's like all sorts of YouTube channels dedicated to relaxing whale songs for your sleep. If that's, who knows what they're saying about you or each other, but it's apparently very soporific. Okay. So rhythm, duets, choruses, melodies. I'm going to revisit this dream. Perhaps you all are dreaming of talking to the animals. I am imagining a world of perhaps jamming with the animals. Let's start that from the beginning.
Let's see.
I'm pretty sure we can all agree about a couple of things here. One, they are probably not communicating little packets of information, that we can measure perplexity on and things like this. But they are communicating, and it's meaningful, I'm pretty sure, to both of them. Why is that? Solidifying group identity, creating emotional alignment. These are some of the things that we know happen with music. And I feel like, look, I'm no scientist. I'm a computer scientist, right? So we're not really scientists. But I look at that last video, and it's not the only video out there on the internet. If you start looking for singing with your dog, making music with your parrot, there are lots and lots of people out there attempting to commune. I would almost say, rather than communicate, commune with the animals in their lives. And that with certain animals, and it's probably the ones that, there's a reason that we live with dogs and parrots, that maybe we're close enough in some way that we can do this with them, and that it perhaps is emotionally meaningful to both parties, or we know it is to us. So we jam with dogs. You just saw an example of that. Why can't we do this with every species? And now I want to come back to the seal. A major issue of testing animals with music composed for humans is that the tempos and pitch ranges may not be relevant to them. There may be species typical ways of expressing different emotional states, going up versus down, louder or softer. And some of these species, they're close enough to us that we kind of get it. Like if you've ever had a dog and the dog has been like, you know what's up. But it's harder, You're in Berkeley. There's all of these crows everywhere. They're clearly vocalizing. I got no idea what's happening there, but it's meaningful. And maybe we could translate. Yes.
If you want to get a classical musician to jam with a jazz musician, they sometimes have the same problem.
There is a translation problem there. It's true.
That's what Baroque is for.
That's a great point. Yeah. If we can all get together on figure bass, then so my translation of this is that we need music translation. And so some of the things that we want to do, at least I want to do, transform the rhythmic, timbre, and pitch content of our sounds into more interesting and relevant sounds for the target species. Ideally, this would work quickly so that you could try things in the moment to find a way to engage. And the goal is to engage socially and emotionally, but not transmitting information like it is forbidden to park here between the hours of 5 and 7 p.m. That is not something I'm considering. Now, if it were the year 2010, I'd be somehow suggesting something with, I don't know, support vector machines and random forests or whatever it was. But of course, it is the year 2023. So I'll be suggesting using a generative language model as the last talk was suggesting using, because that's the tools of the trade today, right? I don't know how many people here are actually, machine learning types. So I'm going to very, very high level explain what a generic language modeling system does. You have a thing here. How many people recognize what this thing is? Yeah. So this is the classic image of the transformer from the 2017 paper, which is our attention-based basic building brick that everyone is using these days for language modeling. And you input some, in the old days, the 20 teens, text in here. I want to eat cheese. And if you are doing translation, say, so you'll have an alphabet or a set of tokens, a dictionary of words, say English words, these are put in. And you get on the output of this from, say, a trained model, some sort of probability distribution that if we blow up, might be, and if I'm doing, do people know what top K sampling is? If I take the top K candidates of my probability distribution, say for Spanish, so I input this whole sentence, and I get my first word out, and here's my top candidates, and you see a probability, that's the vertical blue bar associated with each one. And then you'll pick according to some sampling procedure. Maybe I just randomly pick from the top K. And in this case, I didn't pick the most likely one. And then that becomes input to the model along with the original language. And we get a new probability distribution and we pick from it. Yeah.
Does a different number of dots mean something?
It means that I accidentally put 4 dots in and 2 dots. Yeah, man, I was putting this together last night.
Oh,
And
great.
I felt really good about getting this thing here, and
It's
I just didn't
beautiful.
even notice
Just,
what that.
I
Yeah.
was trying to see if there's a hidden.
No, there's no hidden unit in the dots. I'll go back and fix that later. And as we're going forward, we keep getting new probability distributions as we get greater context in the new language and selecting from it. Yo quiero comer. Now, usually implicit in this, if we're going to train these things, we need to have some idea of ground truth. Now, if we're training within a single language, then you can just do the simple masked language modeling thing you're used to. I just say, predict the next word in the sentence, and I've got the sentence already. And so predict the next word. Did you get it? No? Okay. If I'm doing translation, obviously I need to have some version of the sentence in another language. And in this particular example, here's my ground truth. And since you're asking these kind of detailed questions, these are not to represent non-zero probabilities. These were just to be placeholders. And so the idea here is like the next word better be comer, to eat, because I want to say I want to eat cheese. Yo quiero comer eventually queso. This will be my ground truth. And what we do is we don't actually compare the samples, we compare the probability distributions. So we say, how close is this probability distribution to that one? And that becomes our training method. As I just said, this requires us to know the right output token at every step along the way. And that has implications, which we'll get to. But I'll say this is where we were at in the 20 teens, but it's the 2020s. How many have heard of DALL-E, the image generator? Well, DALL-E 2 is based on something called diffusion models, but the original DALL-E was based on language models. And the original, the old school, the 2021 DALL-E. So what you do is you take an image and you encode it with something called a variational autoencoder, an autoencoder or some kind of encoding thing. And each one of these, and it's actually going to be a quantized one because we need to have an alphabet, a language, a finite set of things that we're going to learn probabilities for. We take an image, we break it down into patches of pixels. These patches of pixels are going to be our basic units. The reason we don't use individual pixels is because language models have a problem, which is that they're not good at long attention spans. I know they tell you they are, but they're not. So if I've got 1,000 by 1,000 image, that would make, if I turned that into a sequence, that would be a sequence 1,000,000 things long, and that's a problem. So they get patches. And so you take something that maybe once had 65,000 thing in my sequence, and now it's 1,000, and it's small enough to run a transformer on. And it's going to be the same game. My input language, a tapir made of an accordion, generates a probability distribution over image patches. And those image patches are autoregressively generated. And that means I start out, now this won't be a tapir, I got this from another paper, so this is going to be a flamingo. And one by one, I sample away. Hundreds or perhaps thousands of sampling steps later, I have a picture of a beautiful flamingo. And so you see how this goes. It's like, this is called autoregressive sampling. And it's got its pluses and its minuses. One of the minuses is that when I'm generating a lot of tokens, I have to take a lot of steps. Yeah. One of the pluses is it's really simple to do, and it's like you get it. I understand how it works. Okay. And another minus we'll talk about is you can't be influenced by future events. It's sort of, this is the whole BERT versus GPT thing, right? It's like, the autoregressive ones. Yeah, we're from Google. We don't use autoregressive. We're from OpenAI. We do. Great exaggeration of their positions. I know this. Okay. doing this in audio. So now what we did was we started with language translation and we said, okay, I've got a sequence of text, outputting a sequence of text in another language. And then I said, we could do a sequence of text and output images. You can also do this in audio. If we have something that can take these really long sequences in audio, if I'm sampling at, say, CD quality, 44,000 times a second, 44,100 times a second. If I wanted to predict 10 seconds of audio, let's see, that'd be 440,000 things in my sequence, which is a problem, again, for a language model. So what we do is we use something called a vector. What you saw with the images. In this case, however, there's going to be multi-level tokens here. So here's a time step, and you see what you see. It's not just one token. There's going to be a set of tokens. This just happens to be right now the best state of the art for representing the audio in a way that when we detokenize it. Right? This is not my work. This is, sorry, and it's cut off. So far, I'm just sort of building you to us. But this is one of the key, now I have to go through the audio again. One of the problems with Keynote, I love Keynote for those things. You saw when the probability distribution went and got really big. That was nice. That was Keynote. A weakness of Keynote is with audio. I'm forced to just play it. I can't not play it. So we're going to skip through this real quick now. Okay. This is SoundStream, something we are using SoundStream. We're training a SoundStream model as part of our system, but it's not ours. Our work.
So the point about comparing it, like the slide before, is that you're not going from language, you're going from sound to sound. And they're not going from text in it.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So clearly I put the build in the wrong order. Yes. We're going to jump forward. Okay. Since you said it, I'm going to go to here.
Okay.
Where we started, text translation, English to Spanish. I'm going from text to text. I have matched pairs. And it's straightforward. It's easy to do with human language because we've got things like the Bible and the Wikipedia that provide us nice, and the entire European Union set of laws, which have nice, especially the European Union, because they got to get it exactly right across multiple languages. You've got nice paired things. Things like DALL-E, all of you out there who has ever put a picture on the web and captioned it? Yeah, so thank you, say the DALL-E people, right? They scraped it, and you've got a matched caption and image pair. So you've got your pair. There are audio language models before us, which I've skipped ahead of. I'll just mention briefly. There's Audio LM, which does use a tokenized version of the SoundStream thing that I just mentioned. And it's the same thing. They've got a language model which is trained on generating sequences of tokens. There is Music LM, which is a little closer to my realm. But both Audio LM and Music LM work somehow conditioned on text. Audio LM is primarily for speech. And so they're conditioned on speech, and they've got lots of labeled speech data. Everything from NPR, for example. Music LM basically trained a model on captions of things like YouTube videos, where you've got the caption and then a YouTube video. So all of these things up to this point are caption of text somehow in your native language, output in something else. Text in your native language, in the English speaker's native language. And it occurs to me that probably half the people in the room do not speak English as their native language. Same thing, Audio LM, Music LM. I don't know how many people have seen this quote. I love this quote. And I tried to look up the provenance, and there are so many disagreeing. It was Laurie Anderson. No, it was Martin Mull. It was, in fact, there's an active community researching this quote to try and figure out who came up with it first. But it captures something. Writing about music is like dancing about architecture. If you're old enough to have read Rolling Stone when it was still a thing, ask yourself if by reading a Rolling Stone review or a critic's description of a song, you could tell what the song was like, really. Because I generally feel I can't. So there's this thought that we're going to translate stuff into, for want of a better word, English, and that English will be sufficiently descriptive. Actually, this is a thing I was thinking about in the previous talk. You know, there's a language, and I'm wondering, you know, one of the problems that happens with machine learning, back in the day when we talked about machine learning, you know, there would be like a hypothesis space, and one of the things we would talk about is that the representational system of your machine, if it is incapable of representing the concept, there's no learning algorithm that's ever going to get it. And one question I might have is, do we honestly believe that English is going to be a representational scheme that could adequately capture the concepts expressed by another species, even if they are concepts along the lines of what we think of? You were about to say something.
In that case, in the agnostic case, you want to get as close as you can to the best hypothesis in your space of existing hypotheses. And like, for all of us in this room, surely that would be whatever is capturable by English or another language. We're not going to be able to get better than that anyways, right? So
I guess it depends, you know, like what's your thought about what is language? Is mathematics a language? Is music a language? Then I might believe you. If it's just the ones that we can write down like with the Roman alphabet, then I don't know, because I think there are concepts that, I don't know about you, but it's hard for me to express in English that I can write down in math. And I do believe there's, I don't know if I want to use the word concept, but there's something that's in music that I can't write down in English. And that's just within my own species.
And in general, emotions are quite hard to put down in words, right?
I feel like there have been a lot of songs with the lyrics being, it's hard for me to put this into words, which is interesting. Yeah. Okay, so now we're ready for VetNet. That's me. This is the primary architect, Hugo Flores. This is Prem Sitharaman, our collaborator at Decoding, which is a company that, actually works on automatic transcription of human speech and allowing you to edit and regenerate. Okay, so what do we do? Well, I told you I was coming at this from a music perspective, right? So this is the prompt. This is the conditioning. Note, I did not write a sick beat. Instead, you make a sick beat. Tokenized by residual vector quantized VAE. These tokens are turned into a hierarchical set of things. Basically, the idea, I skipped over this when you asked that question. These VAEs, the best ones right now for encoding music and audio, you do this thing where you say, I tokenize, I quantize it first, but then there's going to be some quantization error. And so I then am going to make a set of tokens which model the quantization error, which will leave some quantization error. So you make another set of tokens that'll model that. And in the case of our model, it's 14 layers deep, but that's the basic game. And somewhere we are going to arbitrarily, not so arbitrarily, but for the purposes of this, I don't want to get into how we choose, a division of what we call coarse tokens, which are about long-term structure, and fine tokens, which are about filling in the details of the audio. This is going to be sent to a language model. the language model. You see, I've prompted it with some portions of the audio masked. This is what the M's are here. The coarse model is going to get just the ones below the dotted line. It's going to sample from its probability distribution given the prompting. That's going to be handed to the coarse defined model, which will sample based on the prompting again, this time from the coarse model. We detokenize and we get out a different sick beat.
So this is the training?
This is not training. We'll talk about training. This is
The model.
inference.
This is inference, right?
Yeah.
So what is it? What are the model parts? It's the backnet and the.
Yeah, so what happens here is you take audio.
Yeah.
You cover up some parts of it.
Okay.
And then the uncovered parts are then, well, the whole thing is tokenized actually, because we really do it up here. But once we cover this stuff up, I can jump straight to the training. You want to talk about the training?
No, sorry, I'm just, so for some reason you do course first and then fine.
Yeah.
Why?
And the reason we do course first is because, have you ever drawn a picture? One of the things you do when you draw a picture is you get like the first, you got the bigger structures first, right? It's like, if I'm going to draw you, I'm going to do this oval, and then there's going to be some, and then once I've got the overall structure, then I start filling in more and more detail. And so one of the things that's happening here is we found that it works better, and we're not the only ones. We found that it works better, at least in the audio domain. For some reason, I haven't seen them doing this in image. To go, we are going to, first of all, do this hierarchical tokenizing. Then we're just going to look at the coarse layer first to do, we'll call it relatively long-term prediction. Fill that in, and once we've got that, then details get filled in. So what this would sound like if we were just doing the coarse stuff is you'd lose a lot of the high frequencies, a lot of the, I'm sure I'll put this in English. You'd lose a lot of the high frequencies, that's one thing for sure. Yeah.
Why do you think you lose the high frequencies?
In general, because when we're talking about low frequency waveforms, they make, if we're talking short time, they're going to be a big trend.
Yeah.
And high frequency won't be. I can, if
No, that makes
yeah, okay.
immediate sense. Yeah.
Okay, well, so this is the game. Yeah.
Just a quick clarification. So the fine level tokens are fed into the coarse fine level, right? The input tokens.
Okay, so yeah, and maybe this picture could have been slightly better done. So the deal is mask some portion of the other, put it in here, take the mask only coarse, feed it to this. This generates something that gets filled in. Then this, you're right. This is also provided here, and this is
So it's false.
in that sense.
And then the output is conditioned on both on the recovery.
On the unmasked fine tokens as well as that. Yeah. So my bad. I'll make a better picture. Okay, so this was developed for musical creation. So some of the thoughts here are no text prompting, conditioning on the sound, because we're thinking in sounds, we're not thinking in descriptions of sounds. We're not dancing about architecture here. We want it to be faster, so I haven't talked about doing that yet. And we want to allow interactive on the fly updating and generation. And, you know, I think I'm going to, this is like an illustration of it. So we have this thing, and what does that have to do with language translation to the music of other species? How many people know what LoRa is by any chance? Okay, a couple of you. There's an approach that people are taking these days to taking large language models and fine-tuning them on new data. And so we chose to do that here. And you know, it takes about a week to train this thing not using LoRa. But with LoRa, if you've got a small amount of data, you can fine tune it for the sound palette of something else with just say 10 minutes of data and 6 hours of RTX 3090. That's insider talk for people who like to use graphics cards. The point is, about overnight on your home PC, you can fine tune this model. And then once it's fine tuned, you can use it. So here's an example.
Boom chugga lugga lugga, boom chugga lugga lugga, boom chugga lugga lugga, whoop whoop, boom chugga lugga lugga, boom chugga lugga lugga, whoop 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 whoop.
This is what I imagine
Okay.
a TT Monkey wanting to hear from me. Then we take the video, the actual, you know, that video we saw with the two monkeys chorusing, that had about 10 minutes of actual TT Monkey in it. It was like a nature video, and we chopped out the parts with the narrator and just left the TT Monkey, trained the model, and then put this into the model and get this out. Now, no, we haven't gone to the Bolivian rainforest yet. This was like over the weekend. So I have no idea if this would make a TT Monkey more or less interested in communicating with me. Yes.
There's no like meaning in the original communication you intend. Sorry for assuming that it wasn't, but then why are you needed in this? Why aren't we just like learning a generative model for TT Monkey sounds and then generating from it? Like, in what sense is your?
We did learn a generative model of TT Monkey sounds. And are generating from it. But the point is, I want to condition it. And I think were you about to use some? I thought I saw a hand go up over on the side.
It was my.
Okay. I have poor spatial. But I'll say to you, what I want to do is I want to jam with the monkeys as close to possible, as opposed to I'm in another room. Yeah. Now okay. I haven't heard from anyone on this side, so I'm going to just go left to right. Yes.
Yeah, it seems to me, and I hope you can explain this, a really big difference between using the vamp for input and output to then.
Oh.
Okay, hey, it seems to me to be, I'm a historian of science, so I don't have the kind of technical vernacular, but it seems to me that the input and output of the vamp training that you were doing could be interpreted in lots of different ways. So there's different kinds of meaning by making a sound like boom than like jamming, right? Boom has lots of different contextual uses, and then translating it to non-human kind of understanding of those meanings. So I'm thinking about in Chinese, the 4 tones, like ma has 4 tones and has 4 meanings. Vamp might interpret that as a melody instead of 4 different words that are based on pitch changes. So music has its own meaning and its own language and its notes, and I don't understand, I guess, like how you're thinking about that in terms of textual translation for non-human others.
Right. I'm not thinking in terms of textual translation.
But because couldn't the monkey be more than vocalizing, but encoding, I don't know, temporalities or objects into its melody? And how do you disentangle that?
2 thoughts. 1, I'm never going to be able to disentangle it. 2, I think the entire rest of the workshop is going to be focused on that kind of thinking. How do I get this sequence of things that I can turn into tokens that we'll call English? And my positionality is that there's a lot of, by the way, there's a lot of songs I know the words to, ish, that the words are, I don't want to say irrelevant, but it's like, banana, nana, fofama, mama, mama, mo, mama, banana, banana, bobana, banana. Yes, the word banana is in there. And also, there's something else going on. And my hope, and I'm not saying that I'm anywhere close, I'm not an animal psychologist. I am somebody who is coming at this from like the more, there's this other aspect that I feel like could be in there, and I see interactions with other species with us that seem to be along the lines of singing along. And I was wondering, what can we do that would make our sounds more relevant to them, so that in this other kind of mode of interaction and communication, we could get into it. And maybe it's like a pipe dream, and maybe it's foolish. And maybe I accidentally said, you know how like it's not really cool for someone that looks like me to say the lyrics of gangster rap? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I've done a terrible thing like that here. We're trying stuff. That's my answer.
Yeah, I guess I'm also thinking of when Justin Bieber entered, did the collaboration on Despacito, right? He doesn't know Spanish, but he memorized the sounds of each syllable of Despacito in order to sing it, and he does a great job. So he doesn't understand the meaning. I mean, maybe he looked up, or his publicist told him the actual meanings of the words. But he's producing, so he's producing, melody over textual meaning, and those things are combining, but he doesn't have the kind of embodied cognition of understanding actually what he's saying. And so, yeah, I guess I'd just love to know a little bit more how you're thinking about melodic, I'll listen to an opera and not understand the words of the opera, but understand its emotional valence. If I were yelling this at you instead of whispering or whatever, affecting some kind of, feminine vocalization, those two have really different kind of context, even though the words I'm saying are the same. And so I guess my point is that the context for the words is always this embodied kind of vocalization, and that also has to do with music, and that's a little bit different than just sound making when you're coding meaning in what you're saying. And so I'm just a little bit confused how this transformation relates to what you were doing before. It seems like a really big leap.
Oh yeah, but okay. I feel like I want to give the other people an opportunity to also talk, because you were going to say
briefly, and we'll come back to this later. No, I appreciate what you're trying to do too. And there's some simple ways that we can do it as scientists, where we can give them choices. We can give them the types of things you said, see what seems to be more salient, what's more engaging. I'll just hold up on that, because that's an easy way to test some of the things you're looking at.
Okay. Yeah. I feel about the same thing.
I would be interested in not turning your stuff into monkey sounds, but the other way around. And if that would be interesting at all for us, if you could.
That's a great question. You want to illustrate whether or not that would make sense? Let's find out. Let's see. Well, this would be kind of a loop. Can I do this? Hang on. Since you asked that question does bring up a possibility. Okay. We're about to see what can happen live with a system. So I'm going to try and record monkey sounds and turn them into naturalist sounds. We'll see how that goes. Oh, wait. Okay, awesome. That's going to be my input now. Here, I'm just gonna make it louder. So I got it. No audio selected. Darn it. Okay, 1 sec. Sorry about this. This is what happens when you do a spontaneous on the fly volume amplify. There we go. Now. Okay. Now, will this work? Only one way to find out. So we have a little interface that it's not the most beautiful interface. Again, this is active development. like some, what did I call it? Oh, darn it. Do you see that there? There we go. Okay. So I think this is the voice of the naturalist.
And so this is, sorry, this is a decoder that's been fine-tuned.
Yes. So we have about 10 seconds of audio. This is running on a PC in my lab. Now let's see what we got. This is what happens when we don't actually know if that's the right fine-tuned model. But, well, as long as we're at this. So I'm not sure what went wrong there, but you saw I was being super, super in the moment. We'll use another thing that may also, we'll see how this goes. This is me again. And what one could, what I'm imagining, this is, steps along the way. This is not there. And obviously there's lots of other stuff that we need to think about. So I don't really know what the Brda model was. I thought that was the voice of a naturalist. But what you can see here is this is running now on stuff. And the thought is that eventually we could have something that could be going sort of in an interactive way, so we could maybe explore what causes interest amongst our non-human, hopefully, friends. I'm going to skip over some stuff since I see that we're getting close to the time. Yeah.
Very little technical question. So can you think of it as some form of style transfer, right? And basically the main structure of the output is the same. So that's the coarse part of the tokens, and the style, right? The way that it sounds.
Yeah. I guess yes. In the lingo of modern machine learning people, you would call this a kind of style transfer. The reason that I hesitate to call it style transfer is because I think style transfer is not a great word from my perspective when I think in terms of audio, because a lot of times what I think of as the style is not entirely the fine-grained structure, but also larger aspects of the structure. But yes, in modern parlance, yes, style transfer. Yeah.
Do you think it'd be fair to say, like in the context of animal communication and beyond everything that has been discussed just over the last 10 seconds, is that you're trying to generate interaction rather than understanding? Like the purpose of the model isn't to understand exactly what's doing, but to create a space where you can try and generate new hypotheses about what generates interaction.
It's a really great question. I definitely want to generate interaction. I definitely want to generate emotionally positive interaction, if possible.
Which is a risk.
I do not think that all, even human communication, is about the tokens. I think a large part of our interaction has nothing to do with the words I'm using. All right?
Got it.
It could be that a large part of interaction has nothing to do with the words I'm using. And so I think to myself, there's a lot. Sorry about that.
No,
it's super
perfectly done.
Illustrative.
I guess my point being,
yeah, what you're saying is right. I think I'm interested in interaction. I think I'm interested in hopefully finding interaction that generates positive emotional valence between hopefully us and them.
Yeah.
And I am almost thinking of the other stuff as what you all will provide.
Well, because that can feed into a conjecture machine, right?
And I feel like you were going to say something.
There's
you
also
were gonna-
out there.
But he's grabbed the microphone.
I was given the microphone.
Okay, so you've got the, what's the approval of the authorities?
Thank you. This is all really fascinating, by the way. I'm really enjoying the talk. It seems like in most of the examples that you're using, the rhythmic structure is preserved, whereas the frequency and harmonic content is altered.
True.
So that's a statement, but I'm wondering if there's something that is fundamental about communication or music or both that is preserved within rhythm and not in other facets.
I think it is, you're very right that we're more preserving the rhythmic structure than the other stuff. That's our own bias, and it came from the original purpose of the model. You heard those like drum beat things in the beginning. The idea was to use this for interactive music performance with other humans. And one of the fundamental things that is true of humans is that when you have a music performance and I'm keeping the beat, I can do almost anything I want as long as I'm keeping the beat. And people will tend to accept it. And so that is a bias of the model and the way we built everything. But if there's like this sort of second level to that, which is you're saying, how do you know that that's the right thing to do? Maybe transforming the rhythmic structures is going to be the important thing. And so what I would say is when I say keeping the beat, we're keeping the coarse rhythmic structure. We do vary the fine rhythmic structure. And I could take you back to those input and output drum beats. We kept the beat, but all the details changed around the beat. But maybe that's not the right thing to do with, say, I don't know, sperm whales. And it comes from where we started this project and now how we're thinking about repurposing it. Maybe we have to rethink the fundamental idea of keeping the beat. I felt like you were going to say something. And you were going to say something.
I was just going to say something about this. Yeah, I really appreciate this talk. Yeah, I think there is a real intersection that's becoming evident between when we try to interact and then we try to decode, because we can get great insights from those interactions with the animals to see what's salient, what engages them. And then that's the beginning of that kind of help. Because we're trying to find some cipher here for decoding. So I think it's not one or the other. I think they feed into each other in a really important way. And but I think we're sort of to try to, it's so, when you think about what's even salient to another animal that you're doing. And the other thing, just from a communication theory point of view, when you screamed at us and said, what's going on? I mean, most of what we do as humans, we think we're didactic, but most of the meaning is conveyed in the paralanguage, the paralinguistic, what we're doing body-wise with the tone of our voice and things like that. That's pretty recognized in terms of human communication theory. So we have that whole big package with animals too that we've talked about a lot today. Anyway, just wanted.
Yes, I mean, I was just, I think, related to a lot of these things, going to ask what happens if you do the same kind of translation procedure between things that are a little bit more legible to, does it like preserve the words? Can I do this to do just like voice conversion, or what happens if I do this with?
I mean, this same technology is definitely used for voice conversion, and variants on it are used for things like this, like Google's project, differentiable DSP. Is exactly if what you want to do is play a flute in on one end and hear something that sounds cello-like coming out. That's definitely this tech. But I think you in the back.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the talk. Thank you. So my question was, I think it seems to me like there's a fundamental assumption here when if you're trying to translate human music to something that's more salient to another species, like a TD monkey, and you're trying to generate positive valence in the other species. I think the fundamental assumption is that their version of music is used in a similar context to ours, which is that, so like with humans, like you explained, when we jam together, that's a form of social bonding, right? But with TD monkeys, or really any species that has mated paired duets, I would imagine that when they hear their mate duetting with them, they experience positive valence. But when they hear a stranger or a neighbor duetting with them, they're going to experience negative valence. Because to them, a territorial song, the reaction to that depends entirely on who's making it. So if you're playing back something that's generated by an AI, that's almost certainly going to sound like a stranger. So I would actually be surprised if it generated positive valence. I would expect it to generate negative valence because they're going to perceive it as a stranger singing, which is a threatening stimulus to them.
I'm just going to jump to our what's next. Finding a situation where a jam with non-domesticated species is possible is something we'd like to do. We want to try it out and see what we're getting right and wrong. And this is very important. And maybe I'll boldface this right now. Obviously, we have to do this in consultation with people who know a lot more about the species we're trying to do this with than we do. I do not claim to know anything in that realm. I'm just an excited computer scientist / musician who thought it might be really cool to do something that engages at the emotional level as opposed to the tokens of information level. But I would need to talk to someone else in this room who especially would know a species extremely well before actually trying this with any particular group of animals, because you bring up some great points. I know we got to stop.
No, we had a discussion in SETI, I think in Dominica, about this whole question of passive versus active. So active, but when we talked about active was playback, is it okay to play back? And somebody played up with the idea that having the whales agree. So like they would stimulate some kind of chat box, and if they don't like it, they don't do whatever it is that causes this thing to speak. But this is different because the jamming is somewhere in between, right? It's like it's not just playing. I don't know what in between, but it's not playing back, but it's actually playing together. It's sort of an interesting concept, and assuming you had a way to figure whether they're interested or not interested, it would be sort of address this problem of whether you're doing wrong. But I do acknowledge the fact that when you yelled, okay, besides the fact that at the moment it was scary, it brought me into a different emotional state. I'm still dealing with it.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. But I'm just saying it's clearly very, even we don't understand our own emotions, let alone what the world would. But I think it's worth it.
You know, I feel the urge to buy you a drink now afterwards.
Sounds great.
Good. We have coffee now outside for 30 minutes.
Get your coffee. Yeah.
And we'll come back.
There was one more.
I can just.
We'll talk.
Yeah, we could talk later.
Okay.